Hello and welcome to the Game Day Podcast from talkSPORT with me, Sam Matterface, talkSPORT's chief football correspondent, Alex Crook, and everybody's favourite former Chelsea left-back, former Charlton left-back, Benfica left-back, West Ham left-back, Scott Minto. On today's pod, Varsicle. There were so many bad decisions made this weekend, you would have thought the Southampton board were making them. Have Arsenal thrown away their chance of winning the Premier League? Who is going to own Manchester United by the end of next week? And why does no one want to take charge of Leeds? It's all on the Game Day Podcast from talkSPORT. Well, gents, before we get into the games themselves, let's go through the weekend's big talking points. And a lot of it centres on VAR. Now, I'm sure everyone's pored over these decisions over and over and over again, but there were so many match-changing decisions. It was pull your hair out time if you've been an advocate for VAR over the years. Scott, Alex, we've talked about VAR so many times, and one of the things that Crook and I have got this impression is that once one decision seems to go the wrong way in that VAR room, then all of them over the weekend, all the big ones seem to go away. It's like a cascade. It's like dominoes. Once one makes a mistake, they all seem to make a mistake. And I don't know if you've ever been in that VAR room, but it's quite a sort of, it's a big sort of communal area where there's a lot of different VAR stations, so they're all in there together. And I just wonder whether it's catching. Once one makes a mistake, it's in everybody else's head that they've got to be ultra connected, and then they just lose their brains. It was bizarre, wasn't
it? It was, and as you say, we've had weekends like this in the past where once one VAR official makes a blunder, the others seem to follow suit. While I respect Howard Webb for putting his head above the parapet and issuing that grovelling apology to Brighton and Arsenal, he could have sent one to Chelsea as well, by the way. But it's hollow, isn't it? Because these are game-changing, season-defining moments. If Arsenal lose the league title by 2 points come May, I don't think Howard Webb's apology in the middle of February for just an inexplicable blunder is going to make them feel any better. Same for Brighton. They went into the weekend, Roberto De Zerbi, with ambitions of gate-crashing the top four. If they don't achieve that, if they miss out on European football by a couple of points, again, the apology won't mean much to them. Listen, the problem isn't the technology, and I've always said this. I think VAR, we've seen it work in international tournaments, we've seen it work in foreign leagues. The problem is the idiots who are using the technology. The standard of officiating in this country, and I've said it for a while, Sam, is not fit for purpose when you consider the Premier League to be the best league, the richest league in the world. And until the PGMOL get a hold of that, and I think Howard Webb is trying to get a hold of that, nothing is going to change. We're going to keep having these conversations. How can you forget to draw the lines on the pitch? How can you be so focused and so obsessed by one Brentford player who might be offside that you miss the guy at the far post who is actually offside? I mean, come on, guys. Get a grip of this situation.
I mean, look, let's just say Howard Webb's only just come back to the Premier League. He's only just got hold of this organisation, and he will turn it round, I'm sure, and we've got to give him time to do that. There's an elite performance programme where the new referees are trying to come through the system. They're trying to fast-track that, and in 5 or 6 years' time, I'm sure we'll be talking about that we've got the best officials in the world. But right here, right now, that does nothing to console Brighton fans. That decision was outrageous. They forgot to put the mark on Mark Gurhey when they should have done, and that goal would have stood. Estepinian's goal would have stood. And then you've got the other incident with Arsenal, which is the big one, really. I mean, I don't think we've made enough of it. They might not win the title now, and it could come down to that decision. Look, you can't just blame refereeing decisions. There were other incidents in that game. There were 89 other minutes during the course of that football match where Arsenal should have taken charge of it and should have done better against a Brentford team that, although are in good form, would be expected to be knocked over by potential champions. But you cannot have a decision like this without some sort of action, can you, Scott? Someone's got to do something. There's got to be some sort of big statement so that people know that it's unacceptable to miss those opportunities. There's 2 of them in that room that are having a look at it, and a video operator. How has it happened? There's 6 eyes looking at that.
That's the end of the pod, isn't it? I think we've done an hour already. I don't know what more I can add to what both of you have said. You know I'm an advocate of VAR, and it's not VAR that's the problem. It's the people using VAR. You look at the Souček one. I was at the London Stadium, and how can anyone not see that's a goalkeeping save from Thomas Souček. The ball has gone behind his body and hit his arm. That's a save. The Arsenal one.
Do you know? But before we go any further, let's focus on that because we've done the other two and we understand what the situation is. But the Thomas Souček one we haven't visited yet. You were with me watching that. You were sitting in the row in front of me, and we both turned around and just went penalty straight away. There was no doubt about it. We saw it once on a monitor, and then we made our decision. But what I thought was more galling about that was that afterwards we were given advice from the PGMOL that the reason that decision was not overturned and the VAR didn't get involved was because Thomas Souček's arm was on the floor breaking his fall. Therefore, it was not a handball offence. I mean, that is just manipulating the rules of the game to justify a bad decision. You are much better coming out and saying, do you know what? We made a mistake, rather than a mealy-mouthed excuse as to why a decision was not given. And that is something that I think must change immediately, because sometimes people just make mistakes. Put your hands up or down if you're Thomas Souček, and take responsibility for your actions, Scott.
And you know what, Sam? That's what Howard's is trying to do. Look, I don't know the guy, I really don't, but I feel like I'm defending him. What more can he do at the moment? Look, we know that VAR still has not found the right balance. I'm a great believer of the beliefs that Howard has in terms of a light touch and trying not to get involved unless you really have to. But the individuals still need to take responsibility for what they're doing in that game. And while I agree, and still we're always going to argue, if anyone thinks that because we've got VAR, it's going to be 100% consistent, we're going to get decisions 100% right, it ain't going to happen. Stop looking for the consistency, because you still got the people making their own decisions, the judgment calls on the VAR. But that is just a basic error. And where Howard has come out and apologised for the other two, he should come out and apologise for that as well. Because that was I thought Graham Potter actually dealt with it incredibly well. When you think about the amount of pressure that's on him at the moment, the amount of people that are desperate to jump on the bandwagon of saying, look at what Chelsea have done over the last 2 decades. He's got to go. He's under pressure. If they're not in the top 4 by the end of the season. And yet those 2 points are as critical to him as those 2 points are as critical to Mikel Arteta. So, look, I feel like I'm now getting as passionate as you two. Are you shaking your head there, Sam?
I don't think Graham Potter feels under pressure. I don't think he does. I mean, I stood with him in the room afterwards, and I had to try and coax it out of him to talk about the penalty decision. He was like, yeah, well, you get some, you don't get some. Like, hold on. It wasn't like, it wasn't a light touch. This was a heavy touch. And in the end, he said, yeah, well, it was a good save by Thomas. I've only seen it once, but a good save. Okay. But stop being so calm about it. Be annoyed. Grab the microphone and scream down it how much you're furious about VAR. I mean, actually, David Moyes was more furious about the goal that was disallowed at the other end of the field. And that was legitimately ruled out.
Yeah, but that Sam, was a deflection. That's Moisey deflecting from what he knows. If that was the other way around, he'd have had you up by his neck and saying, you're a Howard Webb kind of lookalike. I'll have you. But no, look, that
a little
was
bit more hair than Howard, only a little bit more.
It's looking very well, by the way. You've criffed it up nicely this morning. Yeah. No, but look, there's a lot wrong with VAR at the moment. And you were right, Sam, to say there that Howard's only just come in and he's got to turn it around. And, I think he's given the right directive. Don't change things unless you really believe it's wrong. But there's enough decisions there. We talk about the other two, which is obvious. How can you spend 3 minutes on one and then panic that you're not even looking at another line? That's poor individual professionalism, really, that Howard Webb can't do anything about. But in terms of this one, he almost needs to say, look, this is my directive. But guys, come on. You've got to referee this in the way that you should know whether it's a handball or not. That's a handball. And then don't come out with the arm supporting the hand, supporting the connected to the collarbone, connected to the whatever. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, okay. We got a couple of other big things to just rattle through before we get into the games themselves. Pep against the world, a rather defiant response to the charges made against Manchester City this week. I mean, he's using it, isn't he? And quite rightly so. This is a tool now for him, right, to create a siege mentality. And I think it's likely to work, actually, isn't it? Because the Manchester City fans very much got behind their team on Sunday. and his team looked in fine fettle. I mean, they didn't actually play particularly well, but they still managed to win that game with relative ease against a very average Aston Villa team. We'll get onto that in just a second. But his pre-match rant in the press conference about how basically he wants to bring down the establishment, and or every other club in the Premier League were after him, and it was now I'm definitely staying. Now I'm definitely staying because he wants to put trophies back on the table. He's like, wow, he properly went for it. Manchester United, the date for the bids to go into Rain, the merchant bank, closes it's a soft deadline, isn't it? It goes in this Friday. Jim Ratcliffe has definitely submitted a bid. This Qatari group, I'm not entirely sure, have submitted a bid. And I wonder whether or not, and I mentioned this in a bar on Wednesday night with Adrian Durham and Crookie and a few others, I wonder whether or not the Glazers are going to be able to sell this club at all, Crook.
Well, I think there's a little bit of a suspicion amongst some of the interested parties that maybe they're not as committed to a full sale as maybe is being made out. I actually spoke to somebody reasonably close to Manchester United over the weekend, and they felt like the Glazers are willing to sell 100% of their shares. But it's all about the money, isn't it? They value the club at $6 billion, which is $2 billion more, I think, than Chelsea went for. I think some of the interested parties believe that's a little bit overpriced, bearing in mind they're going to have to invest heavily in the stadium. The playing squad is in need of an overhaul this coming summer as well. I've always been a bit sceptical about this Qatari bid because obviously Qatar already own Paris Saint-Germain. You can't own two clubs competing in the same UEFA competition as United hope to be in the Champions League next season. Then I was told at the end of last week, actually, this is a separate group. It's not Qatar Sports Investment. It's not the Paris Saint-Germain owners, although they will be consulted. But I think UEFA are going to have a long, hard look at this because the line is tenuous, isn't it, between Qatari Sports Investment and this group of private individuals. Well, I've never felt like Sir Jim Ratcliffe has the spending power to complete such a big takeover, but we know now that he's possibly going to have to borrow money in order to get it over the line. Do Manchester United fans really want that? That's the thing they've been protesting against when it comes to Glazers for the last 20 years. I don't think a sale is close. I think this deadline is a waste of time, to be honest with you, because if a decent bid comes in after the deadline, the Rain Bank are not going to turn it away, are they?
No. I mean, there's a couple of points here. The first thing is just because there is another group that comes from Qatar doesn't necessarily mean they're the same group that are buying PSG. You might say that the line is tenuous and it may well need investigating, but two different people from the same country can buy a football club. For example, FSG are Americans, Todd Bowley's an American, and
slightly bigger country, the United States of America than Qatar.
There's not only 4 people in Qatar, though, is there? At the end of the day, it may well be a completely separate group. Until you know that, you can't just blithely say that because they're Qatari, they're the same people that own PSG. I mean, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
I don't think that's exactly what I said.
No, but that seems to be the narrative. The narrative is because they're Qatari, they have to be associated in some way with the QSI. Now, it may well be that that's the case, but we don't know that, so we need to find it out first of all.
If that's the case, then why does the guy from PSG need to be consulted?
Nasser El Khalifa. I mean, that's the other issue is that he is a big advisor. He's not the sports minister, but he is the advisor to the Emir of Qatar, which is another area of sort of
you're
conflict
right.
of interest.
You're absolutely right. Just in the same way that we've all got to think about Manchester City, innocent until proven guilty. But all we can say is what we think at the moment, and the investigations need to prove one way or the other. But what we have had in the past is nation states sort of saying, no, it's just a company, it's not to do with us. And we know the trail goes back to them.
Absolutely.
And I'm not sure I'm with Crookie and that. And I understand what you're trying to say. I'm not sure you can compare Qatar to America. I understand the principle of what you're saying, but they are two very, very different countries for many reasons.
Absolutely. The other problem is, of course, is that it is incredibly overpriced, because if you're trying to charge someone £6 billion for something that needs £2 billion to be renovated and then another £1 billion to sort out its main product, then that is a major issue. You're actually asking someone for £9 billion. And I don't think, even in my wildest dreams, that Manchester United are worth £9 billion, which is why there isn't as many bidders. But I've always had this view that as soon as they said that it was up for sale, the share price went like that. It went up 14%. It went up again the other day when they said that someone was interested. And I just think, do you know what? I've got a feeling they won't sell it. I may be completely wrong about it. I may be completely misjudging the situation, but I've got a feeling that it will not be a wholesale sale of Manchester United.
Can I just make a quick point on the Manchester City situation as well, and those comments from Pep basically suggesting that all 19 Premier League clubs want City thrown out of the league? I know more than one club were a little bit unhappy about that because they haven't ever discussed this situation with the Premier League. In fact, there was a Premier League board meeting last week. Manchester City's FFP charges were not even on the agenda because it's now a legal process. So legally, they didn't feel it was the right thing to do to discuss that situation. He's trying to create a siege mentality. But again, there's a fine line between doing that and just making yourself look a bit silly. The banner that Manchester City fans unfurled before the game at the weekend in support of the lawyer who's being paid an extortionate amount of money to try and get them out of these charges. That was embarrassing. Come on.
Crookie, can I just... Sorry, Sam.
That was the plan. That was the plan, to create that mentality, create the them and us. He's done it. That's what he does. That's what Fergie used to do.
Absolutely. And how many times did the people from the outside saying, look at Sir Alex Ferguson saying, does he really believe that, what he's saying? It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. And I've talked about how difficult it is. I've said before, it's only happened 3 times since World War II that a team has gone to win 3 consecutive top-flight English football titles. Now he's got the edge that he's been looking for, that perhaps the Man City players have just been off a little bit. Now he's got the edge where he's talked about we need the fans back on side. Now it's almost like watching Manchester United from, 20 years ago.
And do you know what? They've got a great chance of winning the title, especially after what happened on Saturday.
Ivan Toney's got his goal, and what an important goal it could be in the Premier League title race. Arsenal won, Brentford won.
It is offside, yeah. Probably they will give an explanation later on in the week, but today we haven't got any. But it's too late, it's fine. The goal was allowed and we dropped 2 points.
Stayed in the game, cool, stick to the game plan. Got the, I would say, well-deserved equaliser. Yeah, that's very impressive against an Arsenal team that I think is very, very good. And they of course, they're top of the league. They're favourites to win the title, and I think they will.
Let's start. Arsenal 1, Brentford 1. Ivan Toney's controversial equaliser wasn't properly investigated by VAR. We know the reasons why. They made an error. They were so concentrated on the blocking from Ethan Pinnock, they didn't check out Christian Norgard at the far post, and that was a major issue. It means that Ivan Toney has scored 15 goals this season, with only Kane and Haaland scoring more. Arsenal, I think, conceded a couple of opportunities, actually, before they went in front in the first half of that game. I think Brentford rattled them early on, Scott. Now, you and I both did the previous game between the two, where Arsenal was so far on top of them that they smothered them out of the game from the minute the game kicked off. That did not happen at the Emirates on Saturday. Are they just starting to lose a little bit of their edge?
Well, absolutely, over the last 2 games. And I actually think, as strange as it may sound, the FA Cup almost acted like a bit like an international week. If you think about the Manchester United game beforehand, where they somehow found a way to get all 3 points, they just wanted to play Premier League game after Premier League game. And it almost, of course it mattered getting, the FA Cup. And of course it mattered you're playing against Manchester City. But he made changes. And since then, they've not been the same side. And it's almost as if, they needed to go on the roll and keep that momentum going. And they haven't done that. Look, what Sean Dyche did with Everton was amazing. That can happen. But then you need to bounce back and come back with 3 points. That's what champions do. They respond in the right way. And you're right, Ivan Toney bullied that defence, and we haven't seen that. And I've seen Arsenal enough this season to say, if they carry on playing like that, they're going to win the title. We know that not all teams can do that for the full 38 games. But this was such a big game for them in terms of making a statement. We're coming back. We've got Man City coming up. And if we win that, we're 8 points ahead with a game in hand. Definitely is a wobble. Now we're going to have to see how they react on Wednesday.
Crook, can I ask you whether or not you think that maybe the lack of rotation is costing Arsenal dear? They've made only 14 changes to their starting lineup over the course of the season in the Premier League. Now, you compare that to Graham Potter, who has changed his team 67 times since he arrived at Chelsea. I mean, that's the extreme. But 14 seems to be rather minimal. And I wonder whether that means that they could be running out of gas?
I think inevitably, physically and mentally, they've got themselves into a great position to end their 20-year wait for a Premier League title. I think once you get to the middle of February and you've got clear daylight between you and the chasing pack, I don't care who you are, there's no way that can't start to get in your head and seep into the dressing room. So I think that's a problem. I think physically they do look a little bit jaded. People like Bukayo Saka, I don't think maybe is quite firing like he was earlier in the season. And this is a wobble now, as Scott said. You know, the Man City game, they took a lot of positives from that, but they still lost. There weren't too many positives from the Everton game. And actually, I always get messages from Mrs. Crook, big Arsenal fan, during the first half of the weekend, and she was saying Arsenal have lost it, which seemed a little bit extreme. But, you know, obviously, there's a lot of controversy about the way they dropped 2 points. But I don't think anybody who watched the game, watched the 90 minutes, can argue that Brentford didn't deserve something. And I think there's huge pressure on Arsenal now going into this game against Manchester City to find themselves second in the table by the middle of February, having had a very decent lead at one point. I think psychologically would be a hammer blow, even though, of course, they will have games in hand.
2 games ago, we're saying, isn't it great that he's been so consistent with his team selection and that's why they're top? And now we're saying he's tired. They're all tired. The season goes like that, guys. It's up and down. It's about reacting. It's the psychological. It's the mental thing. And then the body takes it through. This is 2 games. It's not been good. They are having a wobble. They need to bounce back. They cannot afford to lose against Manchester City. But that's what happens in a season. There are ups and downs.
There are ups and
bounce
downs,
back.
but it's all been up until this point. So the whole season has been going north for Arsenal until they've got to this point. The only setback that they suffered in the first half of the season was the one at Old Trafford, and they immediately jumped back. The fact that they haven't, I think, will concern Mikel Arteta, who did get a little bit uppity in after the game against Everton, and he was not happy, and quite understandably so, by the way, after the game against Brentford, because that goal should have been ruled out. Now, that could be costly in terms of the title, because Manchester City breathing down their necks after a 3-1 victory against Aston Villa. The two play each other on Wednesday night. Before we get on to that, I just want to pay tribute to Brentford and Thomas Frank, whose team are 10 games unbeaten. And they're not only 10 games unbeaten, they haven't played Aston Villa and Southampton during that run. They've played Liverpool, City, Spurs, Arsenal during that period. That is mightily impressive. I mean, they deserve a round of applause, don't they? Anyway, back to Arsenal against Manchester City, which is the big game on Wednesday night. All eyes will be on it. Manchester City obviously responded to their own setbacks in terms of off-field issues against Aston Villa. They still didn't look quite right to me, but Pep almost took the mick a little bit, Scott, because he's decided that your role position is now redundant. Anyone
it
can
was
play
when
it,
I played.
right? Anyone can play it. Even little titchy Bernardo Silva can play at left back. And if he does play there, he doesn't have to play there very often. He can just dip in and dip out of it. Is it a part-time position, left back?
Oh, you bang out of order, Sam. What were you when you were playing?
Left back.
Yeah. I just think fullback really hasn't been your conventional fullback in the Pep Guardiola team for years, has it? You know, and he's playing midfielders at fullback, but then asking them to go into midfield. He's playing right backs, asking them to go into midfield there. But then Kyle Walker, he's perhaps more of a third centre half that just sits in. So it's fullbacks within his squad. Each different fullback does a different role. But yeah, look, it's incredible, isn't it? How you can let Joao Cancelo go, sort of go 3 at the back, ask Bernardo Silva to drop in. They're just that good, and Villa weren't. You know, let me tell you, they ain't going to play like that at the Emirates. If they do, then they will get beat. So it's all very well getting away when you're completely on top against a team like Aston Villa, who are not playing particularly well at the moment. It's another thing when you're playing against your title contenders.
This is a big game on Wednesday night, and it means that if Manchester City win this match, they go top of the table. That psychologically, even though Arsenal will still have a game in hand, is quite important, isn't it?
Absolutely. I guess the big question for Manchester City, will Erling Haaland be fit? Obviously, he would be a massive loss. I'm kind of leaning towards the...
Even if he's on the bench, will he just have the same number of touches?
Well, I'm kind of leaning towards the opinion they probably just took him off as a precaution. But yeah, I think the onus is there for Manchester City now. I think they need to start building momentum. We've said all season that if one team are capable of stringing together a run of successive victories and clawing back that deficit, it is Manchester City. They've been there before. And I think there's going to be a bit of nervousness around the Emirates as well. If Manchester City score early, I think the Emirates is going to be a lot quieter than we've become accustomed to this season.
Fascinating to see how Bukayo Saka gets on, because as you mentioned earlier, it's a slightly sedate Bukayo Saka over the last couple of weeks, although he did create the goal, which Trossard scored by playing a lovely little 1-2 with Ødegaard, getting down that right-hand side, pulling it across the penalty area, and Trossard finishing it off in that game against Brentford at the weekend. But depending on who he's playing up against at left-back, because he struggled with Nathan Ake in the FA Cup game, and I just wonder whether or not that matchup is coming in again. Right, okay, let's turn our attention to Tottenham's travails. They were battered live on talkSPORT at the weekend. Poor old Antonio Conte probably needs another anaesthetic because after going under the knife and having his gallbladder removed, more pain, I'm afraid, away at the King Power Stadium. He got himself back to full fitness. I mean, God, I tell you what, that is commitment, isn't it, from him coming out of hospital after that big operation and getting back on the touchline for this game, although he probably wishes that he stayed at home. But Leicester survived what was an early onslaught in which Christensen made a great clearance off the line, then had a part in scoring and helping set up a goal for Tottenham Hotspur. But then after that, it was all one-way traffic, wasn't it? And I think what a brilliant response from Brendan Rodgers and his team.
Wasn't a great debut for Pedro Porro, was it? More Pedro Porro, based on what we saw at the King Power.
Oh.
And I think you saw the importance of Romero to that Tottenham side as well, because Eric Dyer had a dire afternoon. So Leicester were well worthy of their win. I think actually credit to Brendan Rodgers, because there hasn't been any great investment in that squad for a long time now. He did get some of his own players in the January transfer window, and already they made an impact. I think Tete looks an excellent addition, a really exciting player. Suter seems to have fitted in quite well as well. You mentioned Christensen. So Leicester now, for me, are easily going to propel themselves to safety. But who'd be a Tottenham fan? You beat Manchester City, you play the champions off the park one week, and then you're going to get absolutely thumped by a team in the relegation battle a week later.
I actually wrote on my piece of paper, is it typical Spurs to beat City and then lose so badly to Leicester? The answer to that question is yes. In addition, though, to solidifying the Leicester defence, Wout Faes is also Liverpool's top scorer since Christmas. How impressive is that? What a guy. What does Antonio Conte do from here? Because it's falling apart rather quickly, because they've also lost Rodrigo Bentancur for the rest of the season after a collision with Pilis Mendy.
Do you know what? I mean, I look at the table and I don't think Manchester United will win the title, and I don't think they'll be there right at the very end. But I've said for a good few weeks now that I think they will finish third. I think Newcastle are the ones who are the vulnerable ones. And then you look at the table, this has never been a better opportunity for Spurs to finish in the Champions League place, because of where Chelsea and Liverpool are. With respect to Brighton, Fulham and Brentford, as great seasons as they're having, I don't think they're going to be there. So at this moment in time, unless one of the big boys go on a really big run, it's between Newcastle and Spurs. So to do what they did against Manchester City, where they seem to love playing against City, especially at home anyway, don't they? And then the very next game, to be that bad. I mean, look, I sort of watched the highlights of it, and I spoke to Dance, actually, who was doing the game for Talk, to say, look, what did you think? But I watched it and I just saw the gap between the defence and the midfield. What you talk about, Faes being top scorer for Liverpool in 2023, what a tackle it was. But Brilliant. One tackle has gone straight through. Brilliant. And suddenly they're at Eric Dyer, who just keeps on backing off until it almost get on the goal line.
I was going to ask you about that, because what I couldn't understand with Kelechi Iheanacho when he scored that goal was why Eric Dyer was backing off so much that he didn't commit to making a tackle. At some point, when you're in that situation as a defender, you've got to do something, haven't you? You can't just keep moving backwards.
Well, being the great left back that you were, Sam, you know exactly, what to do. And what you do is you show them on their wrong foot.
Yeah.
So it's absolutely a pace thing. And you talk about Eric Dyer. He knows he's played that role long enough now. He's got that lack of pace, but you cannot be backing off and let the guy shoot. You're not doing anything. So it's actually quite basic defending. And someone like him, who's predominantly, I think, a holding midfielder, being asked to play in that role, you have to get tighter. But his initial starting position was poor. Okay, he perhaps didn't expect the fast tackle to come through to Iheanacho like that, but you've got to be tighter in the first place. You've got to be thinking, I can't let this guy turn and run at me, because once you do, he is quicker than me and he's going to beat me. But you're right, there comes to a point where you've got to try and make a tackle. He didn't even do anything.
Try and get a block in or something. You've got to attempt to do something. You've got to affect it, because if you don't affect it, then he's going to get the shot away, and then there's...
What's the point of being on the pitch?
Every chance that he's going to score as a result of that. You talked about the gap between defence and midfield for Tottenham was a problem. There's also a gap between Fraser Forster's hands, which were exposed quite badly. I wonder if Tim Castagna is still having heart palpitations about that back pass as well, because that was a moment where I'm sure he was like, oh no, please, don't. Anyway, he was lucky he got away with it. And so did Leicester City. They played well in the end. Right, let's move on to Manchester United, because Crook was commentating this game for talkSPORT International. And better late than never, United netting 2 goals in the final 10 minutes to take the game away from a plucky Leeds United who had chances. What a spicy encounter this was.
Well, it was a spicy encounter. It was a great atmosphere by and large, but we should condemn the tragedy chants from both sets of supporters. I can't.
Which both clubs did as well.
Yeah, they did. And I can't get my head around why that still goes on in 2023. But let's not let that detract from, as you say, what was a great occasion. Similar story for Leeds for much of their season, really. For 60, 70 minutes, they were the better side. David De Gea, on his 400th Premier League appearance, made a couple of excellent saves. And then Erik ten Hag, whose game management, by and large, since he came to the club, has been spot on, made a couple of tactical tweaks, and that ultimately won the game for Manchester United. Terrific header from Marcus Rashford, a facet to his game that we didn't really see until Ten Hag came in. Brilliant pass from Wout Weghorst to tee up Garnacho, and an excellent finish from a young player who was criticised by his manager in midweek for lacking an end product. There you go, Gaffer. Eat your words. And I think, again, brilliant man management from Erik ten Hag. And I want to pick out Weghorst for special praise. I know you're going to ask the question, where would United be without Marcus Rashford? Well, the stats tell us the answer would be mid-table. But Weghorst, who I was critical of in midweek, he gets so little service in this Manchester United team because of the way that the wingers like to cut inside and don't really put crosses into the area. The way that he led the line, his hold-up play, his touch, some of his flick-ons, absolutely first class. And that really gave Manchester United the springboard to go on and win the game. I thought he was man of the match, Weghorst.
So when we said to you a couple of weeks ago against Nottingham Forest that he put in an almost exemplary display as a centre-forward and basically linked the play and helped Manchester United improve as a team in that particular game. And then the other night when you saw him after you'd had 2 or 3 drinks, you decided that he was a donkey and told everybody that he was useless and you didn't know what he did. Now you're a little bit more sober, only a little bit more sober. You watch the game from a professional point of view this weekend. You actually notice how much work he does. So is this what we would call a backtrack, a big vehicle reversing here?
No, because you can play badly in one game and be criticised and then play well in another.
But you call him a donkey
and get plaudits. Yeah, maybe that was a little bit harsh. But you're also forgetting the conversation we had with that rather cocky Leeds fan in the pub. And I told him, I said, don't worry, you got a point in your cup final. United were rubbish for 70 minutes. They'll beat you on Sunday. Look what happened.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you did, yeah. I told you so. You better good job you turned that conversation around. Well done.
Couple of wine gums rather than a couple of beers, and he's suddenly, giving a donkey and all this and that. It is amazing, isn't it? Either up there or down there with Crookie. How Mrs. Crook deals with him on a daily basis, I just don't know.
It is fickle, though, isn't it, the business? But Manchester United, quietly but confidently are starting to incrementally eat away at the leads that the other 2 teams above them have built up. So is there any chance that this 2-horse title race, which was a 1-horse title race 2 weeks ago, could end up being a 3-horse title race?
I don't think so. I think what Ten Hag has done is nothing short of sensational. I didn't have them at the start of the season, even in the top 4. And I think even to finish 4th, I think would be massive. To get Manchester United back into the Champions League would still be progression from where they were. And when you think, as Crookie was saying, not just on the pitch with Brentford, but off the pitch with Ronaldo. So, look, what you're basically asking is, are they capable of going on a really good run and also 2 teams dropping sufficient enough points. From what we've seen, how we base that on, they're not going to do that. That's not going to happen.
Well,
City
Manchester United have already been on a very good run. They could do that again.
2 defeats in 27 games, I think, now.
Yeah.
And they have to do that again. And that's not easy. So let's see. Look, can I say categorically they're not and they won't? I can't say 100%. The table says that they can. Trying to use my little bit of knowledge that I have on football to think that will City drop enough points? Will Arsenal drop enough points? Will United carry on that run? I don't think so. But still, finishing top 4 is still an absolutely fantastic achievement for Ten Hag.
Okay, me and Crook are just going to spend the next 10 minutes trying to climb out of that box that Scott has put us back in.
He played the game, you know.
Yeah, but it was a redundant position. It's only part-time, left back. Right, okay, let's move on to a relegation story where, surprise, surprise, Bournemouth had a good weekend. Bournemouth won, Newcastle United won the Eddie Howe derby. Newcastle extending their unbeaten run, equaling a club record of 17 games. Although it has been a little bit of a stutter because now they're trying to get into the top 4 and the cup finals on the horizon. They've just started to drop a few points, a few draws in there for Newcastle United. In fact, 4 of the last 5 league games have ended in stalemates. But it was an emotional day, Crook, for Eddie Howe. You spoke to him afterwards. You were down at the ground on Saturday. What was the atmosphere like? I imagine they were all very happy to see him.
Yeah, they were. He got standing ovation as he got off the coach. He kept a very low profile in the preliminaries. Jason Tindall, his assistant, former Bournemouth manager, was very visible, exchanging pleasantries with former colleagues. You didn't see Eddie Howe until a couple of minutes before kickoff, and then he almost snuck into the away dugout. He did tell me that he made a conscious effort to make sure he got in the right dugout, having, of course, occupied the home one for so long. But it was a lovely moment at the end of the game when he was applauded by all 4 sides. The Newcastle fans got involved in that as well because he didn't get a chance to say farewell when he left the club back in 2020. But I get the impression from speaking to people close to Eddie Howe, he's just relieved that circus is over now because he isn't someone who enjoys being centre of attention, isn't someone who enjoys the limelight. And I don't think he would have enjoyed it if Newcastle had beaten Bournemouth, particularly, and sent them closer to relegation. You're right to point out the fact they're struggling to win games despite the unbeaten run. They're struggling for goals as well. Callum Wilson missing the game with a minor hamstring injury. Alexander Isak's only scored 1 now in his last 7. And you have to go back to November the 6th. Since then, Newcastle have only scored more than 1 goal in a single Premier League game on 1 occasion. I think it's a problem, and I think it's a problem that could cost them their place in the top 4 and could cost them that cup final. Having said all that, we both felt in midweek, and Adrian Durham laughed us out of town in that bar in Manchester. We felt Bournemouth could get something from this game. They played really well, and the signings they made in January, Dongo Ouattara has fitted in to the Premier League with ease. I think Hamed Traore looks a decent addition as well. I'm not going to say Bournemouth will stay up because it's difficult down there, but I give them more of a chance than Southampton, their South Coast rivals.
Yeah, but that's not too difficult, is it? In terms of that bold claim that we made on this sofa last Thursday, which was that they would get a point or something against Newcastle, it was probably born out of the fact that we'd seen Newcastle just stutter slightly. But Bournemouth themselves, especially under Gary O'Neill, have been tactically aware, haven't they? They've just been a little bit unlucky in terms of not being able to have the quality, the necessary quality, which is desired, required to keep them either in the Premier League or to attack some of these bigger teams. But they certainly dealt with the pressure at the weekend, and with the return of Eddie Howe, everyone had a point to prove. But they have just won 1 of their last 13 Premier League matches. You talked about goals. Miguel Almiron scored some goals, though, hasn't he? And he was back scoring again this weekend. 10 goals in 22 Premier League games. It was a good, tidy finish from him. Dan Burn, another one like Castagna, had a few heart palpitations because of I don't know what he was doing. He just seemed to stop as the ball was placed to him by Nick Pope. He didn't know where to go with the ball, and he ended up needing Kieran Trippier to get him out of a very tight spot. But it was a point well earned from Newcastle United, and another one on the road to trying to get into the top 4. I mean, the way the Premier League table looks right now, the top 4 look like this, with Newcastle 41 points from 22 games, Manchester United 46 from 23, Manchester City 48 from 22, and Arsenal top of the pot 51 from 21. But the 2 teams that are lurking, trying to nick that place in the top 4, at this moment in time are Tottenham and Brighton. Tottenham aren't very good. They've got 39 points. How? From 23 games. So Newcastle have got a game in hand on them. And Brighton have 2 games in hand on Tottenham. They've got 35 points from 21. Let's talk about Southampton then, because they sacked Nathan Jones. End of the road for him after yet another damaging defeat. We'll get to who comes next in just a second. But Scott, it was an abysmal turn of events, wasn't it? I mean, first of all, Lamina should never have been sent off. The first one wasn't really a yellow card. The second one was just absolutely ludicrous. Didn't even speak to the referee, Jared Gillett, and got a second yellow card. So I think we can put that in the column of bad officiating weekend. But in terms of letting a game slip through your fingers, if you are 1-0 up against 10 men and you desperately need to make sure that you get something from the game, even if you do concede 1 goal, you can't concede 2, can you?
No. And first of all, again, on the officiating, it was almost like, oh, don't gang up on me. You're the third one coming over. I'll give it to you. I mean, ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous.
But also, if that is a rule, and apparently I understand that is a directive from referees, that in order to stop being rushed by a group of players, the third one that comes over gets a yellow card automatically, because they do that as a game management thing. But if you're really interested in game management, you should know your players, and he should have known that he'd already booked Lamina, so he should have booked one of the others.
Well, look, I mean, he then might turn around and say, well, it doesn't matter. You know, the third person's meant to be booked.
Yeah, but that's not in law. That's just
right.
a directive. That's just a directive of game management.
Well, then, absolutely, Sam. I'm 100% with you. I'm not going to argue with you on the laws of the game. You know everything. And
I don't.
You
know, I
well,
understand.
you know more than most, mate, and fair play to you for that. You know, absolutely. Then, if that's the case, you know that's going to completely change the game. It's ridiculous. It's just shocking officiating. And at least we're not mentioning VAR in a bad officiating there. But in terms of the game itself, when you've got your manager saying didn't really want them to go down to 10 men, you're not in a good place. And look, one thing I would say is, and I've been in a position before where you're really, really under pressure. You're ahead. You start to get a little bit nervy, or the fans start to get a little bit nervy in the last 20 minutes. You sort of sit back. You do exactly the opposite of what you should be doing. It's kind of human nature, even though you should be. Look, use that. Make the pitch big. Use that extra man. But you're right. You have to find a way to not lose that game. I mean, you have to find a way to win the game, let alone not lose it. So it just summed everything up. And I think that game just really sort of summed up Nathan Jones' time at Southampton, and really, and I feel for him. I do. I don't know the guy. I said last week I want to sort of try and be supportive of British managers, but he was out of his depth, as simple as that, and he was far too emotional to be a Premier League manager. And I think that game, if the Southampton hierarchy, they wanted to give him time, clearly, because they'd spent money in January. But that game just said, look, we've got to do it now, because we're definitely going down with him.
Yeah, I mean, look, listen, the internet is full of great manager quotes. And I'm sure that he will populate those lists for many time to come. But he is not a great manager. And sometimes, the managers that speak the most actually and end up coming up with these catchphrases and these viral phrases, actually the ones that don't last very long. You've got to be something special to talk the way he did and still stick around, because he invited pressure, invited scrutiny, and ultimately, Southampton just what were they doing? I mean, we've spoken about it so many times. If you're going to replace a manager like Ralph Hasenhüttl, at least have an idea as who you're going to have come into his hot seat when you do pull that trigger. They obviously didn't, because they wouldn't have appointed Nathan Jones if that was the case. I wanted to talk about cool heads when you really need someone to react in a sensible way towards the end of the game when everything else is going against you. And James Ward-Prowse took a free kick in injury time, which I thought was really inventive, really sensible, and with the kind of sort of thing that you need from an experienced leader. Try something different, create a great opportunity for a teammate, which nobody else has spotted. The only problem is that he's the only one with any real experience in that team, and nobody else is on the same wavelength as him. So he's passed the ball to someone in a load of space inside the box, and that player just does not react. And that is the situation that Southampton are in. They've got some great quality, but not enough of it, and there's a lot of inexperience there as well. So I was going to say, well, congratulations to Wolves, because they held on to over an hour. It's their second away win of the season. But the two manager jobs that are now available in the Premier League are Southampton and Leeds United. And those two are linked for a reason, aren't they, Crook?
Yes, they are. And actually, Southampton's game after next is against Leeds. And there is every possibility that Jesse Marsch could be facing his former club as Southampton manager. Now, this is not a done deal. It's important to stress that. But there is genuine interest from Southampton. They're exploring the possibility. It looks a bit mad on the outset because Jesse Marsch has only recently been relieved of his duties. 2 wins in 17 at Leeds tells its own story. But I can understand the criteria maybe for potentially going down this road. He's got links to the Red Bull system, as did Ralph Hasenhüttl. I think there's a belief that the squad that Southampton have would suit Jesse Marsch's style of play, that high press, the formation that you like to adopt at Leeds. And what you have to say about Jesse Marsch is that he brings positivity, where Nathan Jones, maybe with some of his ramblings and the way he went about things in training, brought negativity. Jesse Marsch is the opposite end of the spectrum. And he does have experience. He did keep Leeds in the Premier League last season. So I think it's a possibility. I know Steven Gerrard fancies the job as well. I'm not sure they're going to go down that route. But I think what we can say about Southampton and Leeds is they're probably both shopping in the same supermarket. There aren't many decent buys to be had in terms of managers. The list of decent candidates who would want the job at this stage is quite slim. Leeds have found that already.
Yes, I think scouting around at this moment in time for someone to take the job is very difficult, as Leeds have already sort of proved, really. Sean Dyche was sitting on the shelf waiting to be picked up, and Everton act first, and they get him. And now you're in a situation where the type of manager that both Leeds and Southampton want is probably Sean Dyche, but he's already been taken. So they're looking for the next best thing. That isn't really obviously apparent to anyone. Jesse Marsch has just come out of a job. Difficult to go straight back into the fire after this short space of time. But remember, he had a good 6 or 7 month break before he took the Leeds job. So I'm not sure that he's cream crackered. If he does end up at Southampton, then that will end up being a guarantee of more great quotes in press conferences. But will it be enough to save them, Scott? Because they are already 3 points adrift at the bottom of the table. They don't have a great squad. They are going to need some sort of magic to drag themselves out of this situation. I'm not sure that Jesse Marsch, and I'm a bit of defender of him because I think sometimes he gets labelled with he's American, so he doesn't know anything about football tag, which is completely unfair because he clearly he's got qualities. I think it's going to be very difficult for him.
Absolutely, mate. And look, I've been supportive of him to a point as well. And I thought that the sort of, the American stuff was very disrespectful, and Ted Lasso and all that kind of thing. And I think he's actually just wrong. But I don't get it. I don't get it. I'm sorry. I don't get it. There's a guy who couldn't keep better players out of or away from the relegation zone. And now you're going for someone like him. I don't get it. Even Steven Gerrard, he got sacked in the Premier League because Villa were going the wrong way. Why would you look at him right now?
Where would you look? Would you be going to Spain to look for someone? Would you be going to France, another competitive league? Where would you be heading? I mean, there's some young coaches. There's, in fact, a very young coach in France at the moment who's doing very well in French football, whose English has gone and made his name out there. I think Still.
Yeah.
Yes.
Out there, yeah.
He's learned on Football Manager, I think, didn't he?
but he's someone who's doing very well. Would you not take a punt on something like that, or would you go into the Championship and find someone who's doing particularly well?
They're not going to do that again.
Do you know what? No, well, it depends. They made the wrong pick.
Not everybody's like Nathan Jones, though.
No,
because he came through.
I don't think anybody is like Nathan Jones.
No, look, I'd like to think, despite me being far older than both of you, in fact, I'm probably as old as the two ages put together, that I'm not old school.
Right,
but I just think you've got to look short term. And if you have to try and find a way to stay up this season, forget about next season. Forget about developing. It's not as if Southampton are 10 points off getting away from relegation and they're down and you can start planning towards. Because as we all know, and I covered the Championship, I think, for 4 or 5 seasons, that isn't always easy to get out of. And Vincent Kompany's doing an incredible job at Burnley. But there's still a lot of people also, a lot of teams that have not got back up within those first 2 years and then the parachute payments have gone. Just go for the person you think can do it this season. Put him on an ender, give him a big bonus if he stays up. So he'll come in. What Leeds have done, and they've got to be careful now, let Southampton sack their manager. They waited far too long.
Yeah.
And then they're going for people who are got possibilities of winning titles in their country. So why would they leave at this particular moment, despite it being Leeds United? And
I never understood the idea that someone at Rayo Vallecano, a hero of Rayo Vallecano, would leave mid-season when they're on the opportunity. They've got the opportunity to take them into the Champions League for the first time in God knows how long since Lopetegui was playing in goal for them. They would leave that scenario to go to Leeds United. Now, as big as Leeds are, as big as the Premier League is, and we've mentioned this before, it is the NFL, that manager will be able to come in the summer once that job is done, or next summer once he's completed the task that he's been set to do at Rayo Vallecano. Arne Slot has got a massive release clause. He's got every opportunity of winning the Dutch title.
Yep.
He can wait till the summer. There will be a job eventually for him. So why does he need to make that move right now? I always have this very odd thing in my head about why clubs act and don't have a plan going forward. Why on earth would you do that? You know, it baffles me. And both these two teams are guilty of that. Hasenhüttl was definitely getting sacked, so why didn't they have a backup plan? Jesse Marsch was always teetering on the brink from maybe sort of before the World Cup. So there was always a possibility that it could happen. Where was the backup plan? Where was the next level? Why isn't Chris Wilder getting a call, Crook?
I think because, to use Scott's terminology, he's regarded as old school, and too many sporting directors, too many owners don't want to go down that route. They try and reinvent the wheel, as Southampton did with Nathan Jones, and it backfires. I think we know that Chris Wilder is also a very combustible character. I think modern chairmen don't necessarily want to be challenged on that level. But I get your point. I guess the question for Southampton is, do they believe in their heart of hearts they've got a realistic chance of survival, and therefore is a firefighter-type manager, or Chris Wilder or Sam Allardyce, the right appointment? Or actually, are they trying to do a bit of forward planning here and thinking, well, we're going to end up in the Championship, so let's look ahead to next season as well?
Even if they end up in the Championship, Chris Wilder would be a great appointment.
True,
Scott?
true.
Well, he ticks both boxes, and two things on that. Cookie, and you're right, and you're saying what they might be thinking, the board, but they're 4 points away.
They've got a tough run of games, though. But the issue that Nathan Jones has had is that he's played a lot of the teams in and around them and lost. You know, a lot of their easy games have gone to Nathan Jones,
Absolutely.
and he's messed them up.
And
that's not Nathan Jones's problem. That's the board's problem. They should never have given the job to him in the first place.
You're preaching to the converted
that's
there.
Right. No, absolutely. All of us here. But we've got to look forwards. Okay, and you're right, Crookie. Difficult games coming up. But, you know, you kind of, well, okay, you guys did see Bournemouth drawing against Newcastle with the way that sort of Newcastle are playing. Who would have seen Brentford go to the Etihad and getting all 3 points? I could name half a dozen, 10, 12 games where you're thinking, Coop and Buster, didn't see that coming. So that you just pick up little points here and there. And then it's amazing how morale changes and turns around. And just on Chrissy Wilder, and I know him as well, he seems to have got a really bad reputation now that he can't deal with the boards. That's not right. What happened with Sheffield United, and look what's happening with the guy, you know, with the takeover there now. Maybe he kind of saw what was coming there, Chrissy, really, and had the arguments because he's passionate.
There was all sorts going on behind the scenes there.
Absolutely.
There was court cases going on behind the scenes at that time, in terms of who owned the club. So there was a lot of rows going on behind the scenes between the actual owners, not between him. I'm sure that he was involved in some of it, but it was very difficult at that time for him to negotiate a path through.
And now are they still in the transfer ban right now? And because of what's happened with the guy that they've got, so you know there's reasons behind that. And he also perhaps would have learned. Okay, maybe I went a little bit far and blah, blah, blah. This is a really good football guy with a good football brain who, as you say, Sam, I think ticks both boxes. And I don't think there's many people out there. You can go for a big Sam. And honestly, as much as old school it sounds, that you know they just need someone to keep them up, because it's all very well saying this is what we're going to plan for the future. We're going to buy cheap and sell big, and we're going to have these talented young players. They ain't getting out the Championship like that. Let me tell you, it's going to be very, very difficult for them. While you're in there, try and stay in the Premier League. Chrissy Wilder, for me, ticks both boxes.
And that was a philosophy that Southampton employed in the summer, which they abandoned very, very quickly. Be interesting to see who gets the Leeds job, who gets the Southampton job. Give me 2 names for the Leeds job that are big contenders now, because we haven't really spoke about that. Crook?
Well, I was actually told yesterday that they've approached as many as 10 managers and been rebuffed. Looks like Alfred Schroeder, who was Erik Ten Hag's assistant and replacement at Ajax, is in the box seat. Spoke to Kev Hatchard about this on Sunday night.
He just got fired.
He's not convinced.
He just got fired
he's not convinced at all. I don't think they've completely given up hope when it comes to Rayo Vallecano, but as you say, that's going to be a difficult one to get over the line. But I would make those two the top 2 contenders. Southampton, I think at the moment, Jesse Marsch is a worthy favourite, but there is going to be a process to get a couple of more candidates as well.
They haven't got time to go through a big process. They just need to get it sorted out and get someone in the door. I don't understand it. It's so poor. Anyway, but Leeds United are in a similar sort of boat. Dean Smith's available as well. We haven't mentioned him. He's a manager who's just been relieved of his duties at Norwich City, but he might be someone that could do a job short term. You never know. West Ham and Chelsea drew 1-1. The big story from that game was the Souček handball. Fulham against Nottingham Forest, defeat for Nottingham Forest, but boy, did Fulham play well in that match. Excellent performance, especially from Willian, who's been absolutely terrific. He hit the post and scored a goal in that game. He was wonderful. Palace Brighton, well, again, VAR robbing Brighton of the points in that game. But Brighton, in particular, I think would be. I think Palace would be pretty happy with the outcome in that match, don't you think? Bearing in mind the season that they're having.
Well, they got battered. McAllister could have had a hat trick on his own.
Absolutely, I think they scored with their only shot on target, didn't they? And goal wrongly disallowed and chances after chances after. Patrick Vieira would be delighted with that point.
Yeah, that's a big point for Crystal Palace, bearing in mind the situation they find themselves in where they're playing at this moment in time. Big game on Wednesday night, Arsenal against Manchester City on the talkSPORT Network. We're doing Champions League. We've got Milan against Arsenal, Dortmund against Chelsea. On Thursday night, it's the big one. It's Barcelona against Manchester United. Looking forward to that. All those games live on talkSPORT. And we'll be back on Thursday at some point, or maybe even Friday morning this week, to give you a preview to the weekend. Another big weekend of action on talkSPORT, which will start on Saturday with the Gunners going to Aston Villa. Will they still be top by then?